네, 정말로 다시 델레 당 참제 네 쇼바들레 민봉들레 공모들레 정말.
I want to wish everyone happy Tashi Deleg, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
네, 저 마시 공라 되는 게 마시 공다 지난바 되는 마생기 공도 뭐도 되는 양자 트랜스 랑기인스 랭기인스 다 트랜스 랑에 기라서 근데 가레르스나 되니 굴롱 잠진치 자주 있으면 굴롱 찌신네 되니 추 센저치스 나랑게나 되니 추셰도 자주 쓴지 찌신이 추셰거마도 되니 지 랑도당 지든 추제 삼바 킬네 되니 추셰 요마레스 캐나즈나 되니 잠진치 자주 쓴 찌신네 심지타 지 거로 동아 지자술로 달래 쳐도 다르바 탐지kin도 고방 토백이 쳐도 되는 애들이 초딩이 쌈 닝타바는 내로치스.
So I want to remind everyone before you start to listen to the teaching and to put in place the proper motivation. Whenever we're doing any Dharma practice or studying, listening to Dharma, we always have to have the proper motivation, pure motivation. And as for my part, as the teacher, also I have to have the motivation of bodhicitta. If I don't have the motivation of bodhicitta, it would be this is the wrong way. If I have a different motivation, like I want to make myself give myself a better name or make myself look better or be better in society and that kind of thing, and go along with the motivations of the 8 worldly concerns. If I do that and don't have the motivation of bodhicitta, then this is also wrong for me as the teacher. So also for your part, please put in place this motivation that you are studying this text and listening to this teaching in order to liberate all sentient beings from the suffering and to place them on the level of omniscient Buddhahood.
되네. 아까 세견 카시지 링라 되니 되는다. 선바 당보 스텝 당보디 되니 쌤 지행되나 되니 당보 별로지 슈스라 스텝 당보디 되니 니바들라 되니 쌤 코랑라 딱시제니 쌤바 지다 중중 자중중 야나 등보 등등 야나 자침보 간디도 삼바치 당라나 수술라 되니 다 중중에나 또 등보스 등보에나 되니 첨보스 중나 랍 중나 첨보 지난다 자주 쓴데 고롱대로 아니 디디 지나 되니 다가랑 숨바 스텝 숨바들라니 다가랑라 샤안 심지타 이닝 타반니 또 지삼로 심지 갸침보 지 삼로지 단 세겐 카시 지슈로치스.
So the way to do this is to first just take a moment, and if your mind is going different places and you're distracted by different thoughts or different things, then just take a moment to relax and settle your mind. And then look within your own mind, look at how you're thinking and what your motivation is and how vast your motivation is. If it's maybe a narrow motivation, or it could be a little bit wider, like a medium level motivation, or it could be the great motivation of kind of bodhicitta, of the true bodhicitta. So if it is narrow motivation, then try to extend it to make the medium motivation a little wider. And if it's just a medium motivation, then try to extend it to make it as vast, the great motivation of the bodhicitta. So the main, the best that you can do, what we're aiming for, the best way to do it is to have the vast motivation of the bodhicitta, as I described.
Didi sumbares, Tegala, dos Shavachin, Samlo, Nintaban, do, Mindus, Ransola, Sorwach, Sorwa, Yemishi, Sorwangala, Shuruchis, Tigarazana Jan, Kulong Chungjong, Chungjong Korala, Yundajik down, Pain. They are ding the Chungjong Laya, ding the dos, pain the Indian Yare. Dinia Chimboyana, Chimbo Korala, pain Chimbo, Indian Chimbo Yores. Did that announces of Lumi to Tashi. Ni Chimbo di Yuna, the Chimbo Koran Indian, the pain, Niga Chimbo Yungure, and the Gala, same charge in the Tini, Sorwasagora, the Colon, Yachimbo, Sorwas. Do Mindu, one of the genuine Sigda. 장보지 이메 그래서 선보스탄 sembalala sharuchis step sumdo
Okay. The somebody saw another shine.
oh the sham tadigala shantat 중중에나 중부 침봉ala 유나 되digala 초르코레스 마소나 jam니 정선 파조 샤메라 심제 담제 파샤 랑데 nga simje tamje lamne tigi mara mani chorko simje tamje chu chor sim nangla chorko mada simje yawar mujinga masum rese sim ma simje tamje korwa dunga jazu driver so la to simje tamje so pa jamju parol do yowaji de nyedam dewa de lunglang mi simba nyambo na kolo lunglang ani mosquito na se ni denji chigi rese ni simje tamje tarum mo mar nyedam 상마라 chorko ra sim nang
So the first two steps are to first relax and settle your mind as the first one, and then secondly, check your motivation and fix it. So let's expand it. And then the third and final step is when you finally set the proper motivation to just rest in that feeling of the motivation that you are able to generate. If you have, and this is an important point, that you have to really kind of feel it and like increase that feeling or rest in that feeling. And if you have a narrow motivation, then the benefits and the qualities that will come from this narrow motivation will also be narrow and smaller, more limited. And if you have a medium level motivation, then the benefits and the special qualities from that medium motivation will be of a medium scope. And then, of course, when you have the great motivation, the benefits and special qualities of that great motivation will be very vast. So this is the third step, is to, when you finally fix the motivation, is to rest in that feeling. And you have to, this is important to actually feel the compassion and the bodhicitta, to have that sense that it's something really within you, and you're feeling within yourself, from within you, because it's as if you don't have the feeling, then it can become kind of abstract, and there's just some beings over there, and you think, oh, I want to save these beings, and then it won't work out. As the Dalai Lama has said, the government Simchen Tamshi Gamsung departure basically.
맞아. 심제 탐지세디 심제데 다른부 삼부 단계도 심제 탐지세나다 감적 바로래 안나 리 바로 파죠 심지 지불을 삼바당 나랑게 듄라 유저데 심제 많이 받라고 근데 많이 받다 심제 탐지세도 좀 랑게 녀오였나네 다른 보였나네 남기 가르잡 심제 탐지 심제 가르잡 내가 동아셔 디 탐질러스 삼바당 보레스
So what the Dalai Lama was saying is that we can tend to, when we make these prayers and motivation and so on, we can tend to think, oh, I pray for all sentient beings and practice for all sentient beings, but it's kind of like a distant. You have the sense that they're like, just far away from you in the context of that motivation, like on the other side of the ocean or on the other side of the mountain and so on. And then if you have this kind of abstract, more kind of abstract motivation, then you won't put it into practice with the people around you. You don't really actually care. It won't really work with how it should work with the people around you who are close to you. So this is why you have to really have that feeling, rest in that feeling, and so then have the motivation not only for the sentient beings that are distant and maybe not related to you, but also to those that are close to you, that you see every day and everywhere. All sentient beings that because wherever the sentient beings are exist, they pervade it through space. They pervade to the extent of space, all through space, and wherever those sentient beings are pervading all through space, there's the afflictions, and then where there's the afflictions, there is a suffering. So all of the beings suffer. So we have to have this practice of bodhicitta in this way, the motivation this way. So please now take a moment to go through these 3 steps.
네. 딱롱 장주심지 꿀롱 지시네. 드린 추 셈버자비 추세고 녀게 추디드니 특바친도기 다 장주심비 저발에 주고 디기다 가서 그래 닝보자고디 네 자슬라네 자수누주 통미기서 자슬라네 수딩나티게스.
So the teaching that we are learning today, what you're listening to, what I'm teaching, is the kind of essence, the extracted essence of the way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. The Mahayana teaching of the way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. And this is the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas. I don't remember the title. 37 Bodhisattva practices by Gyaltse Ngushu Togme.
Tene dila thomar gewa bardu gewa tene thamar gewa sum ginani den thomar gewa e songsabare tene bardu gewa shum korang la tene simji ki jusheba da simji mu sheba da tene simji ki labja sheba sum cheral tene ta biji thambo da niwa de songsabare tene kapsu baba sumba simji ki labja sheba de la tuteres.
So this is the there's the three main sections of the text: the virtue in the beginning, which is the introduction, and the virtue in the middle, which is the main part of the text, and the virtue at the end, which is the conclusion. And we have we're now in the second, the virtue in the middle, which is the main part of the text. And within this section, there's three subsections: the causes of the bodhicitta, and the explanation of bodhicitta itself, and the trainings of bodhicitta. And now we have finished the first two of those three, and now on the third.
Tene ta sumba simji ki labja sheba de prangla yang tene ni du sura yewa ni chira labja so parji du sheba da de gyula tensu sheba ni dus.
So then within the this section on the trainings in bodhicitta, there's two subsections: the explanation of the 6 paramitas and how to apply the trainings to your mind. How to apply the teachings to yourself is the second one.
The Jula Tensu Shebadilla, the Dole Shebi Chu she says, Doc has an Shuba, she does, you are the.
So, how to apply the bodhicitta or the bodhicitta trainings to your mind? This is basically done along the lines of the 4 teachings taught in the sutras, as I went over briefly last time.
Digi jugla adamijti mesh cheleshana disar. Digi nangni da thambodi the dolochebi chu says do. The thambodi piji songsare rang truba rang tang mangwas mangcho de labja do.
Labja. So yeah, so at the beginning of this section here, we have the 4 teachings from the sutras, and the first of these 4 we did last time, which is about checking yourself and checking your own mistakes, your own faults, and this is basically a kind of it's like a practical advice, something you can put into practice, something we have to put into practice.
Yes, anybody didn't do it. Chansim Ginebama Pangwas, Chanju Sembala Nebama Pangas.
So now we're in the second of these 4, which is to abandon speaking of the faults of bodhisattvas, or to abandon speaking ill of the bodhisattvas.
Somebody Chindagi Chimla Chapa Pangas.
And the third one is third of the 4 is to abandon or eliminate your attachment to the households of the patrons.
Shivadi tsukmo tsikma bangwas tsik tsuk.
Then the fourth one is to abandon speaking harsh words.
어디치더니 다 디시기나네 당보대 손사바레스 초바랑 랑기 초바랑기 땀이 방와세디.
So among those four, now we've done last time the first one, which is to check yourself, check your own mistakes, and then eliminate those mistakes or failings.
대들이 니바디 장심기 니바 마오 방와세 독들이 추시기나네 니바디.
So now we're on the second among these four teachings of the sutras, which is to abandon speaking ill of the Bodhisattvas.
되시더니 다디기 슐로가라 테나 슐로가 숨주 소니레도.
This is the 32nd verse.
네 자와디 뇨몽 왕기 야시 신다기 녜바 링나 다니 냠주르베 택바첼라 슈베 간사기 녜바 메마 야세 라리니스.
So the verse goes, the practice of all the bodhisattvas is never to speak ill of others who have embarked upon the greater vehicle. For if under the influence of destructive emotions I speak of other bodhisattvas' failings, it is I who am at fault.
다 dordyna 디디지시나 데이터 거래 랍세팅 거스나 장주 셈바 이네 순데 아니시 장주 셈바 지부 마임바 네 대바 멤버 강사이나레 지덴베 강사이나레 술라 이나야한테 지 녜바 말랭 녜바 랭에메 말랭에디 니 말랭슨 된 장주 셈바 이네 순데 이 말랭에디 대 장주 셈바기 냠레암 랍자 인비 땡기요레스
So the basic point of this verse, to summarize it down to the basic point, is that for a bodhisattva or somebody who's practicing the Mahayana, they should really train in not speaking of the faults of anyone, whether it's anyone, in fact, whether it's somebody who has entered the Mahayana Bodhisattva practitioner or somebody who's entered the Hinayana lesser vehicle practitioner, or even a worldly person. It's as it says here, it's the practice of the Bodhisattvas to never speak ill of any of these people. In fact, this is what the Bodhisattvas train in, and this is how they live and practice.
데라 뇽몽 왕기 자세 신다기 뇽몽 왕기 세데 뇽몽 단다 값서 바와디 뇽몽디 셰당라 고고레스 다 뇽몽 이자웨 꾸니 롱비 셰당라 코나디그레 차도로 코나디그레스 뇽몽 왕기 세디 뇽몽 세데 뇽몽 망보여라 디 나네 셰당당 아니 차도비 꾸니 랑비 뇽몽바 왕기 세고 딜라 고고레스.
So here in the verse, when it says, if under the influence of destructive emotions, what other places they translate as afflictive emotions or afflictions and so on, it's all referring to this the afflictions, nyummong, which there's many different types. Of course, there's all different varieties of these afflictions, but here the one that really comes into play here the most is anger, and you can also say jealousy will also is also yeah. So here we should understand when he talks about destructive emotions, really what he means is anger and jealousy.
Yeah,
either of these two.
so she ngajal tene yongu erta ina ta tanda kaps baba de shedang dang tene chado tingi la kokores nyomong sena nyomong mongbo era mi kashi en nyomong so what is selection like ro tanda kaps baba
yeah, so sometimes there can be unclear what they mean when what the author may mean, what the teacher may mean when he says destructive emotions or afflictive emotions. And so in this case, it really has to do with anger and jealousy, these two afflictions or destructive emotions, depending how they translate that. And so it could be actually that as a basis for this kind of as a basis for what's described in the verse, that the pride will be in play there as well, the destructive emotion of pride. But actually, in this specific context, what actually is active is the anger or jealousy.
nyomong ge jase shenda ge nyeba lengna dani nyam jurbe se de nyomong ba wangi sena tene ta nyomong ba shedang ge wangi na chado wangi ani jase shenda ge se jase shenda ge sena ne 장주 semba shenda ra yawi se sena santa 장주 semba la kogere shenda gi nyeba lengna sena korang da dukjare ko chawaya bo mare se tawda yana ko choba ya bo mare se tawda yana ko mi dukjare se tawda dita bo nyeba lengna sena nyeba ma joba yana ya lengba ya lang ani tende chi ta gyase shimba ta yana gyase shimba 장주 semba chibu ma yimba ma tanji ngelo shuyimba dor dubi kapso chige 아니 텐맹기 강사 이날에 라 되니야 말아주 직된바 추 미싱이 지기나래 추 미싱이 지기나래 되니 디기 녀바 코득자레 팔랍 출랍 제요 말에서 다 녀바 링나 가지 심발라 딱신 맞진 다 가지 가서 파졸라 딱신 제니 콜레 녀바 링게레 팔라 딱신 맞제바체 랑 출라 딱신 제고레스 가지 파주 미들라 다스 딱제 따니 콜레 녀바 줘바이나 장주 셈발라 녀바 줘바이나 장주 셈발라 녀바 줘비기 녀바 딕바 요레스 데니 택바 멤버기 강사 다라 녀바 줘바이나 녀바 랭바이나 데니 택바 멤버라 카리 녀바 줘바디 디 코랑기 딕바 다 동아 요레스 데니야
녀바 랭킹기 딕바 차게
딕바 랑체 파 랭바이나 투 랑차고 마도 파주 밀 가야 차고 마레스 다에나 직된 팔와 가야 미싱이 직추 미싱이 지라양 네발랭 바죠바이나 양 코란라양 가야 차요 마레 코란라 디바 용고 마레 코란라 네바 용 마레 네바데 랑라 용고레 디바 랑라 용고레 드니 질라야 소그레스 지 콘소
지그레스나
다 파직된 직된
직된
길레 직된라 가지 네바 줘바이나 랭바이나 rang le sokres pajo midla le saga mare tunga chungu mares tadi sangma rang la chungres tela lab da nyumo wange jase sendar jase sena chanju semba chigul lagir ti maimba tene thekba memba la nyeba jona ya re ni normal chidangi ta chö mijing le nyeba joba inare dani nyam jurbes nyam sena nyam jursena rang la tunga yungure rang la le chagre nyam ro rang nyawa dugure dichagres tarang dugurda khase dugja mil joba
so the verse says the practice of all the bodhisattvas is never to speak ill of others who have embarked upon the greater vehicle, for if under the influence of destructive emotions I speak of other bodhisattvas' failings, it is I who am at fault. So if somebody is under the influence of destructive emotions such as pride and jealousy, those two or sorry, not pride, of anger and jealousy, and they may criticize others, and bring up the faults of others, and to say, for example, if it's if it's a Mahayana practitioner, they're criticizing, they may say, "Oh, he's not a good monk. He's not a good Dharma practitioner," or that she's a bad practitioner or nun, or what have you. Then what will happen is that, or even also to kind of regular people, normal people who aren't practicing the Dharma, worldly kind of people, if you bring up their faults in the same kind of way as well, then what will happen is that it is in the end you who will be damaged by this, and you who will accumulate bad karma and go through suffering because of this habit. So if you criticize, so what we will do, a lot of times what we will do is to look at somebody else and just look at them for a minute and think about them, and then immediately we see a fault, and then we'll start to think about that fault and talk about the fault before looking at ourselves. And if we do that to practitioner of the Mahayana, if we see a practitioner of the Mahayana and start to think about their faults and say, bring up their faults with others and talk about their faults, then we will get as it says here, it is I who am at fault, actually, you can also translate it, Nyam Giros, it is I who will become damaged by that or ruined by that. So what will happen is, if we criticize a Mahayana practitioner, we will get a great amount of the damage, of the negative karma and the suffering we'll have to go through because of the criticizing the Mahayana practitioner. And then if we criticize the Hinayana practitioner, then we will get it according a level of damage, or say faults will collect on our side of the karma and suffering and so on. And if we criticize just a regular worldly person, then we will also accumulate the similar degree, or the according degree of negative karma and suffering.
That Tela Sikchik Nyamowangi Jaseshandagi Nyeba Lengwatani Nyamjupe Situzani Chidang Dami Mangja Yang Tashi Majina Rangalamare Kinkivishini Denzola Tashi Majina Kani Givishini di Yundendang Chubatang Kulong Kandi Yoga Ding of Hakugu Mare Senyang Chiwachli.
Hakugu Mare.
Arizona Pena Nagi Tashi Majina, Nate Tunda Mewaji. They call Tashi Jegores, the Lamayang Kugi Kukulong Re, Kuchopa Hagu Maraya. Tashi Jena, Yang Yeba, Tonyong Secret, Tona, then Nazuki Yeba Links and then the Basagua. The Tiwaji Ligres, Kikomaso.
I think it goes
on.
Yeah. So we may wonder about how to approach this with our teachers, the spiritual teachers, and the gurus. That we are supposed to examine them.
Supposed to we have to examine. But now here this word says don't examine. You examine, you will see the faults, then you will then you say your conduct is not good, your motivation is not good. Before you understood their reality, but you already blame, you already decide their faults. Then of course you get nyeba. 그냥
Okay. The Tajik
다시 꿀롱 쥐어봐 던져라 다시 다 맞지와 말이 다시 제고레스 이나 다시 제디 게시모 말레스 다시 가지고 다다 삼바다 꿀롱다 쥐어봐다 던져 다시 제고라 기위신이 라마레 수이나 도보도모레 다시 제고레스 이나 지르당기 최고랑 전주선배기 냠네 시작지나 자슬랑의 시작지나 다시 제 다시 제 말레스 랑추 다시 제고레스
So we have to examine our teachers and gurus before we commit ourselves to following teacher and guru, right? So this is important. We have to do that and check their view in meditation and conduct, how they, their motivation and what they say and so on. We have to check the teacher and the guru properly before we commit ourselves to them. And if it's possible, we may find some faults in the teacher or guru, but then the thing is, at that point, we should not then go around and talking about the faults with other people. This is what we have to avoid in that situation. So, of course, we have to examine the teacher and the guru, and examine people in some certain circumstances like that. But this is for like specific circumstances that we have to examine and check if people have faults or not. But here, what he's talking about is our general approach to living with others is that we should we should generally avoid doing that with people, trying to look for their faults and then talk about their faults.
Especially the Bodhisattvas.
Especially with this practitioners of the Mahayana, we shouldn't really like scrutinize them and check they have different faults.
Check Tandakapsu Babadi, Shimbala, Tashin Chebali, Lejang, Rangla Tashin Che, Gitchbures, Chu Tashin Chebures.
So, especially in the context of this text and our practice, it is much more important, and what we should be doing much more is to look at ourselves and to check our own self rather than looking at others and checking others.
Rang hago gura nga nyeba khazi do nga dubja khazi do nga yabo khazi to kira hago kira phaju la ta chego chena chego chungna pe kale khabo res mi girimo nang le res ta girimo chile res pe gi khakele she
So so we have to look at ourselves. We should really only be looking at ourselves and checking which faults do I have, what mistakes am I making, how many of these mistakes I'm making, and then fix those mistakes. And rather than looking at others, because we can't really, well, first of all, we can't really tell really what's going on within others. There's no use in doing that, trying to check others to see if they have some kind of fault, because first of all, we can't really tell, as was taught by the Buddha, aside from a kind of like a high level bodhisattvas, people cannot really tell what level other people are at or how people really are. Like one individual cannot really check another individual and really understand how they are. Only kind of people with this highly developed, insight and so on, high bodhisattvas and so on can do that. And then there's also a Tibetan saying, which is apt for this context, which is appropriate here, which is that the colors of a person, how a person really is, that is inside them. But the colors of a tiger are on the outside. I think it's the other way around. It's a better way to order. That the colors of a tiger on the outside, you can see what tiger is from the colors on the outside. But the true colors of a person, how a person really is within the inside.
Ini rang susu gi gengur de rang susu le yures. Mi rang susu gengur de rang susu le chanju semba chigi nambala tini chigi toksos kyun yosigires. Kyun yobata o tong tong sigires.
So we all have to bear the responsibility for how we are ourselves. Each individual has to look at himself and bear his own responsibility for how he is or how she is. And it's possible that some bodhisattvas, they may appear as though they have various kinds of faults.
Tene pena sangi jumnen de ki ya tene tanda drum kashi nang lola tene trusing ke kalo wa yura trusing dende chigla tene sebi ki tene drum de do chi ko nu 장주 semba 총바 망보지 교배기 치도 다 근데 통용도 양상기 좀 내니 미세바도 통구도 띠 말어 다이나 낭 공부 된다 침보여랬어 디나시 공라 다 균주나 니 랑니바 줘야 마도 차기 오마레스 띠도 랍시기 마레스.
So there's
충분 대변ችን 보세요. 납자 총방 납자 조생라 장주 선배기다 선바 상보 요견도 총방 납자 주 네 조생나 정도 조생 칼로바게 대 총방 납자 상마시에 지르와 네 상이 좀 내데 공네 네 상기게 주네 되네 조생 칼로바데 세샤
이 콩 차주스 백합라 차주
네 칼바 네
So there's and some stories also that may illustrate this very well, that for example, the story of the previous life of the Buddha when he was a Bodhisattva, and he was a ship captain, and there were this 500 merchants on the ship, and there was somebody on the board, or the Tsering Kalawati Segre Yana
Tsering Kalawati the Chanju Sembi Truba Chongbe Chongbang Abja CH.
Oh, that's also.
This CH do Sanji Gongata, Koga Sanji, the Chanju Semba Abja Truba to Sebaina, call it Tikpa Nieba Chimbo Shu Ngura. The call mean Chomba Chanju Semba Abja Nieba Progress. The dele ngegi koseshana michigi nyeba pogura korang da janju sembe seegi seegi nyeba le tadura sanyi jumne di gone mise re ko chong de khaloba de sebares ta hina khaloba di tatadu jani khaloba seba dang chongbang abje seba ni nyeba chijung kheba chimboyora ta sanji gi kulung nambala mise jodaware ina nangi kulung la 공 미세바 마레스 공 껴바레스 거냐월 도엘이 껴바
Right. So 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 it was the captain of the ship. He was going to kill the 500 merchants on the ship. And these 500 merchants also were bodhisattvas, emanations. And so what the Buddha, who was also a bodhisattva at that time on the ship, what he did was he was able to understand that what this captain was going to do. The captain was going to kill all of those merchants. And so he killed the captain of the ship, actually, the previous life of the Buddha as a bodhisattva. He killed the captain of the ship in order to save all of them from this suffering. On the one hand, he saved the captain from that karma of killing 500 people and going to hell and so on. So he, on the outside, it looks like he really did something bad. He murdered somebody and killed somebody. But in fact, his motivation for doing that and the outcome from doing that was very positive and compassionate, that he saved those 500 people from being killed, and he saved the captain from going to hell. So if we were to look at this person, the bodhisattva who had killed the ship captain, we may start to criticize them and say, "Oh, look, there's a murderer, and did something bad." And then, if we do that, then we ourselves will accumulate this. We will be at fault, and we will accumulate this suffering and karma and so on.
Tene ngoma yang dusuji sanji ta chen ni thingi me du ta ngoma tidu gelong ni usares gelong chen la choba number takwa se da chik thangbo gelong di choba number takwa ni ba di chobilu choba number takwa chik che ni ba di chobilu choba also choba ya Sultim choba conduct so what are choba
Conduct.
oh chikla choba number takba kelong mingla niba de la chobi lodre sege nidu ta choba number takba se di ngone jangju simbar choba number takba se di ngone jangju simbar chobi lodre se di ta jangju simbar insa mare ta ina quran ni ka ta chobi lodre se di ritual shugudus Quran gelong chudim pe chumbo yakbo gomangbo yapdinge tini ngoshi la nganye ba ngoshi ro nganye ge de choba de chobi lodre segin de jiwe sar tini gelong choba number takwa segin di tago pe semba sambo esara Quran janji sema ngone indu tiko trongjo la ta ji khanso gore town se gore village se gore city la jogne misama ala chöshe ni shubi sare chöshe teni koraya da suldim yochen chöshe korajane shubi sare.
So there's another story that can illustrate this, which has to do with the two monks. One of the monks was named Pure Conduct, and then the other monk was named Wisdom Conduct, or the Wisdom of Conduct. And because yeah, so he was the other monk was named yeah, one was Pure Conduct and the other monk was named
whoever wants these two names, very nice name.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other one was named the Conduct Wisdom of Conduct, something like that. Or he had wisdom with his conduct. Knowledge of conduct. Oh yeah. Knowledge of conduct and a pure conduct was two. So the first one, pure conduct, he was probably a actually genuine bodhisattva, The first one named Pure Conduct, and then the second one who was named
knowledge conduct, shortcut.
knowledge of conduct or knowledge of conduct. He maybe was not really genuine Bodhisattva, and so the second one, knowledge of conduct, he was staying in the retreat, mountain retreat, and he was really practicing so well, keeping all of his vows and meditating all day. And they had the 5 super knowledges or 5 types of clairvoyance, and up in his retreat there. And then the other one, the first one, Pure Conduct, he was living in the city or the village, some kind of town with a lot of people around. And he spent all his time going here and there within the town, teaching the Dharma to other people.
Tene, anda kelong chubilo dress injidwa, rejo shugin di tako rejo la te shadu. Tene kogi tanda kelong chupa number dakba sigin di la tene nyebaling. That he did sick never says it. Ko dukja kyasa kila do chushi ta ko tumba yo mare ko ta choba yabo mare ko sulrim nyamsare tene ko komyabo jagi yo mare tene ta dene sene dukja neba sha ling digi res ko chubilo dugi kelong choba number takpala dukja lab de res. That the lab nimaji long the chubilo ta shin tongni tene koran kewa mangbuji kunyawala mahong res tene yang kewa mangbuji kogi kanso gore chiga yane yang do tene chiga kelong yapoji machung res kewa mangbuji kota ko dukja ko tawa loksa re tamra labra lawi ki nyebadi korang la su nyamre korang ta sude nyam dibu korang la pokres korang la topres korang la ta nyebadi leres ko gang la dendi chung res ngone lorgi duks ngena.
So then the monk who was in his retreat in the knowledge or the conduct knowledge or the knowledge of conduct, who was seemed to be practicing so well and meditating all day and so on, he would criticize the first monk, Pure Conduct, who was living in the town, and he would say, "Oh, this monk is no good. He has no, he doesn't keep vows. He has no discipline. He's going here and there around the town. He's not a good practitioner," and so on. So he would criticize the monk Pure Conduct in that way, and so eventually this monk conduct knowledge or knowledge of conduct, eventually this monk died, and because of that karma of criticizing the true Bodhisattva of Pure Conduct, he was born in the hell many times. He has many different kind of existences in the hell realms because of that karma. So he wasn't able to be a monk, to take the monk's vows, obviously, because he was living in hell. He had always existed in hell. So in this way, he in the Tibetan word is nyam. So he was ruined. He fell from that state of being a monk, and he went into hell. Here they translate as it is I who am at fault. but actually you can understand it also as is I who will be ruined or I who will fall, you know.
The Hindu Shimbale Daxin Jeba Lejang, Ni Rang La Daxin Je, the Gichumbres. Shen La Daxin Jeona, Samsan Yaba Yu Secret, Samsan Yaba Ne Secrets. The Marazo Jajika Tachu Tugunare. The Rang La Yaba Yu may say the Jajika Tachu Tugures. The Hindu Shen La Daxi Majiba, Jena Pento Yomares. Dile rangi ta di nyomongba pena khani shedangi gone le nare thado gone ngaja ji gone le nare khane ji gona le du mindus ta sin ches di ta sin che ona tene rangi ji ge nyeba dia nyungru tangaya tang raya shemba la kudu sa she mogo rangi digba ya dunga ya nyong mogo chagires pena rang takje ta na di khepsan yer Pishel takje ta na khepsan mer ki ko thama dilati rang nyam ju chagires.
So the thing is that so the basic point here is that we should avoid criticizing others and finding fault with others and looking for the fault of others, but rather look at ourselves and try to find our own faults in a positive way and to examine ourselves, examine our own faults. Because if you look and try to examine the faults of others, it's impossible to tell whether you are really right. Sometimes you may be right that they have the fault, or sometimes you may be wrong. They may not actually have that fault. It's not so certain. Whereas with ourselves, when we look at ourselves, we really can know with certainty what our own faults are. And furthermore, if we look at furthermore, there's no purpose in looking at the faults of others. It won't really get us anywhere. Whereas if we look at our own faults, there's a great kind of profit we can make from that and benefit we can get from that. Because first of all, we won't waste the time looking at other people, others' faults. And second of all, we will be able to, when we find our own faults, we can fix those faults, remedy the faults, and improve ourselves. And by avoiding looking at others' faults, then we will also avoid the negative consequences for ourselves that it says here. It says that it is I who am at fault, but again, as I was saying, it really can understand the Tibetan to say that it is I who will be ruined or who will fall.
Indo ta rangi themeba ni janju simba shenda la ta sin che ba ina themeba janju simba de la themebe gone tene log bi gone ta sin che ba ina log pa gone ta sin che ba ta tene de la tene kazo gore chi nyeba rangi te pena log bi gone ngazo ta sin che che ro ta sin che ni de la ya tene nyumong bo pena do cha shedang timo ngaja thado gi puine tene de la yang nyeba tukja da me mala be na digir ta sin che chi ro nyeba do thong chi ro ta lo bi ngoni ngara zo namdo ko ni chi ta sin che chi ta sin che ni khorang la da nyumong bo wang do khaya ma sung ba ina le ma ja ba na digir res digir ta le ma ja na digir ro ta yang nyumong bo do cha shedang kare gi wang do song ne tene rang nyumong ba de ma thong ba che shin gi kyen di duge gi che do ni shedang gi ko ne tukja la nyeba leng do cha gi ko lang ne ni nyeba leng tha do gi ko ne nyeba leng nga ja gi ko ne tha nyeba leng ba ina ti rang nyumong bo ko ni pha ta jin che yong do rang la chong ma do khepsan yo ma res ko su se
Nyomungi gone chachin di neba yinsa.
Nyebale, nyomombo goni china, rang nyomombo gi ju chini, porwa longura.
Oh.
Ta jangji semba de chigla, kirangi taxin che, ra? Ta taxin che de yang, samlo, ta taxin che de, ta kulong yakbo ji goni che, ra? Ta ina yang goni jangji semba de la nyeba ji tong. Ta nyeba tong de sekin, kirangi nyomombo gi, dosha shedangi goni tini, kirang kola leng na, ti nyeba cha rugura.
Okay.
O di cha rugura, di indu, tini chungna, taxi majina, ta sa tangburan taxi majina, kirang nyomombo gi la kumaro, nyeba leng kumaro.
Oh.
If you don't
check,
then of course you don't react by your emotion. If you check, you see the fault, then you, based on your defilements, then you react. Then of course you become nyam, kira nyam bukis. Mare, kira dikba yungurai.
Yeah, probably so. So if we check, examine, and the character of Bodhisattva or practitioner of the Mahayana, and with a good motivation, then it's possible we may find some fault, but at that point, if we don't then go around and talk about the faults, then it's fine. There's no problem with that whole thing, with doing that. But if we if we examine the Bodhisattva and then see a fault and then start to have some afflictions or the destructive emotions come into our mind, and then start to criticize them and talk about their faults with others, then this is where we will be ruined, or this is where this is what will bring about our ruin. So and of course, if you examine somebody or a bodhisattva or anybody else with a mind that's motivated by the afflictions, by the destructive emotions, then of course this will become a non-virtue, and even just by examining them in that way, you will be ruined or get some negative result from that. But the point is, if we examine with a good motivation, without the afflictions or destructive emotion, and even if we find some faults, it's fine as long as we just don't go and start to talk about those faults with others.
Indeed. Best chungna. Takshi machi se shenla. Takshin cheba na nyeba tongri. Kaji da nyeba mena yang chanju semba di rang semdi nyomomba ki yoba na nyeba ji tongri. Tong yongdu nyeba di tongwa na nyeba di leng na tini rang nyam jugres. Takshin machi na nyeba tongri mare tini nyeba ma tong na rangi khanso gore nyeba jugi mare nyeba dila sumba dila nyeba maju wena rang nyeba nyamgi mares. Rangi nyamgi mare. O disum de gejum bores. Ta jin cheba ne chi nyeba thongura. Thongna shen le nyeba jugure jena kancha gre phajo di nyamgi mare rang nyamgi. O di kejedi. Di gejum bores anda share de.
So a good way to understand it is, and an important thing to understand about this, important way to understand it, is that the best way to go about your life with others is to not even try to look for their faults, not examine to see if they have this or that fault. This is the best. Because then you won't get even the appearance of any fault. And then when you don't get the appearance of any fault, you won't start to talk about these faults with others and then get the negative consequence for yourself. But then sometimes we have to look at people, examine people. And so if we have to examine the people, other people, and then it's possible we may see some faults in them. But at that point, if we do see some faults, or it appears they have some faults, then we should not talk about these faults, go around talking about these faults with others. Because in this way, we will avoid actually the negative consequence for ourselves. We will avoid being at fault, as is translated here, or we will avoid being ruined or damaged. So if you don't, in the best case, the best way is to not even look for others' faults, not even try to check, because then when you don't check or even look for them, you won't have anything to talk about. You won't see any fault, and then you won't be able even to talk about them. But then if some faults do appear to you when you do check somebody, then we should avoid talking about them.
당보 예바 미닥 미닥스나 예바디 딱지 마당스 아니 예바디 아니 예바 미마 당보 딱지 마당 예바디 예바 미마 기포서 된다래 가 당보데 게 딱지 당나 아니 예바마 예바마스나 파주 예바마 저 독자도 예바 디레 그 라마 단행에 좀 봐. 슈임바 전주선배 아버디 주빌로드기 디고 카드즈네 지금 랍샤도 그 독자래 그 니레 랍샤서 네바주니 랑게 뇨몽바 펠 랑게 뇨몽바 펠도 코란야와도 어디인도 당법니다 바드 네바 미마 니바들 네바 미마 어디니도 거레스 답답지 마당나 네바 조마로 네바 마주나 랑라 네바 보고 말해 가지 파줄레 네바 여나 메나레 띵아주 레가 마로 네바 여메 랑라 딱시 다에데 랑 레가라 랑 코르발레 참기 이메 타르바 탐지 김비 고마 톱기 이메시 랑기 겐구르테 랑기 키고라 디오 디디케이션 보레스 안타깝스고 소시 디텐데레스
So this is really important to really get these two kind of instructions, or the two steps to this instruction down, which is first of all, don't find fault with others. Don't check if others have faults or look for the faults in others, first of all. And then second of all, don't speak about the faults of others. So those two we have to avoid. If you in the first place, if you don't do the first one, which is to not check for the faults of others, if you do end up checking for the faults of others, then there's a possibility then you will start to speak about the faults of others, and this becomes a problem. It creates problems for you and other people. So it's as in the story with the monk, pure conduct and conduct knowledge, that the monk conduct knowledge, he found faults with the monk pure conduct, and really was checking his faults, and he started to talk about those faults. And because he had this habit of talking about the faults, this was giving rise to so many afflictions or destructive emotions in him, and because of that, he then ended up in hell. So this is, we have to avoid doing that. And the main point is that it's not our job, it's not our responsibility to check for others' faults, and kind of, like monitor their faults and to think about and talk about their faults. Is our job, our responsibility to take care of ourselves and take responsibility for our own faults. And whether or not we are going in the right path or going further into samsara or going towards liberation. This is our own responsibility to check ourselves. There's no, to check ourselves how we are doing. There's no purpose in checking others in that way.
That Tama Niba de Tekba Chela should be Kansa Gis. Ni Nieba Mima Jasalali is Ni Kapdilla Tekba Chimbo Latine Sumbare. Tekba Chimbo Latine Sumba Res, Tekba Chela should be Kansa La Sumba Re. Nieba Mima said. Any Ina Yang Tekba Chimbo Chipula Maimba Tekba Chumure, Chugi Gola Mashugi Inare. So inaya teni ngaranzula digi nyeba yue me takjin che di yabo mares pajol kasi takjin che ba ina rangyam gires ani di tabo nyam chigi chiyuna teni chanju simba di jasa laule res.
So here in the verse it says, if I speak of other bodhisattvas' failings, it is I who am at fault, or we can maybe even change that to, it is I who will be ruined or damaged, it is I who will fall, be ruined or damaged. So here, this is the Bodhisattva teaching, it's the Mahayana text. So it's emphasizing here talking about the failings of bodhisattvas. So he mentions here specifically bodhisattvas, but in fact, this instruction applies to everyone, not only speaking of bodhisattvas' failings, but to people who are practicing the basic vehicle or lesser vehicles, as they translate. Or even speaking of the faults of the everyday people, normal people. Actually, this instruction applies to all of those people, not only bodhisattvas.
Because nyeba ta goya yo mares that this mungala tibachum choro mashu kansala inaya nyeba ta goya yo mare the nyeba thona ya dilaya ani ma goya ling goya yo mares.
So
surely is best.
Oh, okay. So with all three of these kinds of people, people practicing the Mahayana, people practicing the Hinayana, or people not practicing in Dharma, everyday world people, with all three of those, on the one hand, first of all, we shouldn't have a habit of checking their faults. We shouldn't check their faults and examine if they have this or that fault, first of all. And then second of all, if we happen to see a fault, we shouldn't express this fault and speak this fault to others. The best is to not even examine. So as Tugala said, the basic, what it boils down to is don't look for faults in others and don't speak about the faults of others.
That is changes in the Jasalala race.
This is the practice of the Bodhisattva.
This Shidwa, Didi Janasa Gondixaris, Yakshodilla. Oh, the Tsigni Tambodi Midachera, Neba Midachi, Neba Tong, Neba Tonaya Mimas.
Oh, So this, if you get these, this kind of instruction, then you will get the whole point of this verse, which is, first of all, do not look for faults in others. And if you happen to see faults in others, don't talk about them to other people.
Tene tadi chibana ta janju sembanya le tadi torong pata ni torong rang la chu ta o nga ta sin mong chi ge sa ta nga ta tring sung ni ta sin che gi mes ni rang la chu ta chi ta ne tene chi ge chibana janju sembaya gi tene la na cha ge res.
So if we all can look at ourselves, examine ourselves, and see if we are doing that too much, if we're looking at the faults of others too much, and then say, oh, from now on, I'm going to do that less and less, and I'm going to completely give that up to look at the faults of others, then this is our practice of the Bodhisattva.
Tene di tanda one number sangye ba cha res. Nang pa se do nang se tu rang nang lu chu ta se go rang gi kyun ju rang gi nye ba ju leng tende che gen ji la nang ba sang gi se ge res sini thang ge res nang ba sang gi tende chi tu bai na shen gi chi ro ji bu gi nye ba ju nye ba leng de bai na ta ni te de bai na nang ba sang gi cha ge go ma res.
So if we can do this to look at ourselves, look within ourselves, at our faults, and then go over our faults with ourselves or talk about our faults. First examine and ourselves. And then the So first of all, examine ourselves, our faults, and then go over our faults and contemplate what kind of fault we have with ourselves, and then figure out how to eliminate that fault, to abandon and get rid of that fault. If we do this practice, then we are really Buddhists, actually. As they call the Buddhists in Tibetan is the inner practitioner of the inner path, or the inner practitioner. It's the word they use, and so then we'll really become this practitioner of the inner path. We'll become a Buddhist because we're looking within our self. Otherwise, if we go around and paying attention to other people's faults, then and we don't take up this practice of looking within ourselves, then we actually really will not be Buddhists or practicing Buddhism at that time, that way.
So rang la ta sin che se shen la ta sin che ba na rang nyam du gres rang ge wa nyam rang ge kom nyam ne nyam rang ge tom ba nyam jo do cha du gres ne nya wa le che du gres.
So basically, to summarize, if we look at the faults of others, criticize others, and to speak of the faults of others, then it is we who will be ruined or by that. As they translate, we will be at fault. We will be ruined, and we may end up in hell. Yeah, for that.
Okay, this is today's session.
Okay.
And the question and answer.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Tukulare. Okay, any questions, please ask the Ranapari somebody.
Okay, Vietnam.
The Indonesia.
Oh. This is very clear.
The social security.
Any question, please come.
Ask. Maybe don't think of it.
No question?
Oh, this is Vietnamese translator, Urban Tail.
Vietnamese translator, working Thai. Phakchok Rinpoche say one word that if you are judging others, is judging yourself. That's similar to today's subject. Checklist.
What about a social justice? So there's one question, which is what about social justice? What do you mean exactly? What about social justice?
Justice, and I understand.
Social justice and
the mitigate.
Social justice and the Mirik Yana Zugi Pankogi because of Chitogi class drop do and the consul justice chedu didn't rapper chegare didn't rapper chegare didn't social justice like it. I don't know exactly what they mean, what has to do with this. Oh, really?
The same time, Johnson Belega and other institution, but Tumbe not yet. Jobegi Chidu, Sangi Gitane, Kalova Seva. That did to give Johnson Belega. Number of times cause Pulong.
The current symbol the champagne, charge chegores.
Shimbegi Charang Chetomara, Yomo Bokun Langi Maris, the Shamaris, Yadam Maris.
Oh,
She Chizing Kunilang there is to give us just chigors.
So the question is about what about social justice, which has to do with like helping different different classes of people, like poor people or different races of people, different types of people. We're trying to write if some people they perceive they've been wronged by society and so on, there's the movements to help those people, right? The social justice movement. So Tukula says, as long as the motivation is good, if the motivation is altruistic and if truly out of compassion for others, then we can and sometimes should criticize others and talk about faults of others. But as soon as we're doing it out of our own afflictions or negative emotions, then this is what we have to avoid, what's talking about in this verse here. Okay, if no questions, then we will dedicate to merit. Kamsu Jamba Temba Ni Shindu Sawan.
Tenzin Below Darjin Gebaye Temba Yurin Benjaji.